Well, I have two dogs, so that'll do it.
I, I feel that way sometimes. That's the craziness with kids. All right. As everybody starts rolling in, good evening, everybody.
Hello, hello. Nice to join you, Eric.
Thanks for being here, Steve. We appreciate it. It's
Hey,
uh
it's a
it's a
new
doc
year.
talks it's a doc talks without the docs.
We'll have to incorporate some docs in there.
That's right. Well, it was great with Dr. Whitaker, and actually our we should have some other special attendees on this evening as well. She was going to join us after doing we had a great national kickoff this week. So yeah, we had our partners and clients, and it's always that time of year, probably just similar to your NSM, Steve. It gets everybody together, thinking new ideas, thinking about new ways of growing the business tonight with all the profitability talk. But yeah, it was a ton of fun. And you guys were in Calgary, right, last time for NSM?
Yes, that was, and we had to delay it to the summer, just
Right.
that time.
Yeah.
That I won't bring up the word again. But that back in that time, we moved it to the summer.
That's right.
So and we've got one coming up this year here
Yeah.
in Toronto. So looking forward to that.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. Well, first of all, for those of you just joining, welcome. This is, I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. We have an incredible guest speaker tonight, Steve Comerford. It is a pleasure and an honor. Thanks so much for joining us. And established podcaster, exceptional sales manager and leader, and truly a incredible resource and knowledge resource for his
Were you
clients.
were you
So
talking to my team? I don't
hard
know.
to believe that you wouldn't
I,
believe how much they paid me to say that. Thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Great to be on. Great to be on.
And the new office starting to come together. I passed by there. We're missing some stairs, but it should be beautiful when it's done. And looking forward to some great events through there.
We want to pack it with events. We want to do a lot of CE events. Want to host a lot of study clubs, and definitely want to showcase the benefits of Henry Schein, the possibilities, the ideas that are running through everybody's mind, all the doctors and what they want to do, how they want to grow their practices. That's effectively what we're trying to do in the showroom, to give them that space and the opportunity to think big.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing something similar with the Ottawa team. So lots of good renovations, and let's jump in because that's a perfect segue into tonight, which is can't believe 23 is over. Let's put a stake in that one and let's start focusing on what we can do in 2024. And Steve and I have met a couple of times on this and really sort of vetted out some great ones. Again, this being a live event, seems like all these are recorded and on demand and whatnot. I'd encourage you. The chat is open. Let us know where you're coming in from, what part of the country you're coming in from this evening. Also, on the Q&A side, happy to cover those as we go. The last one we did, we had lots of questions as we went, lots of concerns that cropped up. Someone's landlord had just passed away, etc. So yeah, feel free to post through the chat, Q&A, etc. And we'll keep tonight, again, fun, interactive, good conversational. Feel free to, again, in the chat, let us know where you're coming in from. And we'll cover some of those Q&As as we go. So thank you again for everyone's time. We did this a little later tonight because no shortage of overflow from December. Looked like it was the busiest month in our 29-year history, now 30 years in the business. And I know for many of you, a lot of carryover into January as well. Proud 10-year partner, contracted partner with Henry Schein. And Steve, appreciate all the continual support you've done for us over the years.
It's easy to work together, Eric. That's the good part.
It is. I was just past the Novotel the other day, last time I was in with the team. So, I wanted to start things off with the positive way of looking at things. So we want to give as many practical tidbits and really some data-driven analysis. So I wanted to start with this. First of all, three key numbers that can have a magnificent impact, the positive or negative, right, on the practice in 2024. Number one, 85% of dentists, and now it's actually even higher, have a lease that can prevent them from selling their practice. So as we talk about profit, we're going to get into all the financials and rental rates and those type of things. But one of the key takeaways from tonight is not to make everybody a dental office lease negotiation expert or practice analysis type of expert, more so looking at it from the perspective of how do we put a force field around those eventual practice sale proceeds while also minimizing those overhead expenses, such as tenancy expense, as we go through. But yes, it is. I was just talking to Bill Henderson, right, at Tier 3 today, who continually reiterated that the number one reason why a practice sale is dying at the 11th hour is because of the quote unquote stupid lease agreement. Let it be demolition clauses, relocation clauses, not enough term, or just simply the landlord saying no, or deciding to raise the rent just in exchange of transferring the lease. This is another one. This is the bigger piece, 54%, and this is pre-COVID numbers of dentists are overpaying in rent. And that can happen for a few reasons. All too often, the dentist is so excited to get started, so excited to opening up the new practice that wow, right? The broker comes back and says, "Good news, I've got you $50 a square foot, I've got you $100 per square foot in tenant improvement allowance." Right? But we had to increase the rent by $5 a square foot. And oh, the annual increase now is going to go from 3 to 5% per year. Right? Just, again, it's amazing just to say, hey, good news, it's $33 a square foot. But to shift and to look at how it compares to market, and more importantly, what those long-term costs are, we're going to touch on a lot of great empowerment components to rephrase how you look at your next and some of your biggest expenses in 2024 and growth and beyond. This is another one, and all too common that landlords now are asking. Some now, Steve, the standard, some of the big landlords, when you ask to transfer your lease, as obviously a requirement of sale, many landlords right on the cover sheet now say, we want 10% of whatever proceeds you're going to get for the sale of your business. On the cover sheet.
How can you get away with that?
As we say and joke, the landlords are the lord of the land, right? It is the world's oldest, maybe second oldest profession, right? And if they want you to walk in with a purple hat and hop in on one leg, they can. So unfortunately, it is the landlords can say, look, what's your practice worth, Steve, without my keys, right? Or more importantly, look, this is my foot traffic that is your value, right? Why don't you leave my building and how much is your practice worth there, right?
Are you
So
finding today that the landlord has the leverage, or are you finding that the doctor has the leverage? I'm curious.
yeah, it's a great point. We're going to dig into that a little bit. First of all, see, the best way of framing this now, and actually that's a perfect transition, is the fact that, yes, the doctor, especially in these times, a lot of landlords are having the banks having a whole new sense of focus, shall we say, where there's reassessments. They're looking at rent rolls again. They're looking at vacancy rates. They're looking at, how they're going to bridge the gap. Suddenly mortgages have gone up, no different than your residential mortgage. Well, look, that's happening to landlords as well. And if they've got all these locked in tenants or vacancies, how are they going to cover the gaps? So, there's a great article in the Globe the other day that said it's the best time to be a tenant since 94, right? Now that's mostly focused more so on sort of commercial and some of the downtown major urban centers. But, look, the way that we look at it and position it with the landlords as we have now for 30 years is, you know, Steve, your clients, the dentists are, and ours as well, are the best tenants on the planet. You doctors have the highest build out costs of any other commercial tenant. Not uncommon these days, especially in major urban centers, $250 per square foot, $300 per square foot, immensely high. We also have some clients, one in San Francisco the other day, $450 per square foot build out costs. Staggering.
Hmm.
You've got the lowest default rates at 0.5%, right? The likelihood of a dentist not being there after 10 years, less than 1%, right? Take a guess, Steve, at what it is for the default rate for a restaurant.
I don't know, 150%?
Close, right? Pre-COVID numbers, a little over 92%,
Wow.
right? Staggering.
Yeah.
So again, the likelihood of a restaurant not being there is incredibly high versus the dentist. So now put yourselves in the landlord's shoes. You've got a proposal from a landlord, from a dentist versus a proposal from a, right, coffee shop, pizza shop, etc.
Yeah.
Right? Which one means more for you? Plus, the dental clinic is in the same location for 26 and a half years on average. You're COVID proof. I said the word, right? You can't work from home, regardless what your staff says. And, last but not least, you're still bringing in high quality foot traffic. So again, you're the best tenant on the planet. Yet back to your point, Steve, is that the average doctor and or dental group, for that matter, will not get any professional help or really structure or plan out how to do that next lease negotiation or lease renewal negotiation.
Yeah,
Or
from what I understand from doctors, back to your point around half of them are paying too much on their rent. I know many doctors, 99.9% of them are very effective in controlling their dollars and managing that. How do they get stuck on the paying too much for rent? Is it back to just not understanding the details, or how did that happen?
yeah, look, I think it's twofold. I think that, we were founded 30 years ago because we saw that, in many cases, doctors were so excited to get started and suddenly they knew it. They were signing a binding letter of intent on the trunk of a broker's car, and without knowing it,
Mm.
sort of locked them in, and the train had left the station. And then, oh, here's a standard form lease, Steve. And, oh, yeah, it's just sort of standard. And, let's move things along. And a great shine client, we did another one we did in San Francisco, the dentist for the San Francisco Giants. Was a family friend, was a lawyer, looked it over, and they were so excited to get going.
Yeah.
Without knowing it, they had committed to something that was then, especially after 5, 10, 15, 20 years, was dramatically higher than market price. So it's a good piece. Part of it is we're just so busy doing what we're doing, and the doctors are busy patient care and thinking about the next patient and the sedation and what happens if, and what happens if there is, if going to be a more complicated endodontic procedure, right? I think in many cases it isn't the reflection, or in many cases just remembering some of the key dates, which we'll touch on today. The number one reason why a landlord is more profitable now is because they've learned that the fastest and best way for a landlord to increase their profitability without a penny of additional cost, right, is by simply running out the clock. What I mean by that is, right, the average dental lease is a 10-year term, 2 5-year options, etc. What the landlord is not going to do is remind you, Steve, that, hey, don't forget that lease is coming up in 2 years, or hey, you're 1 year out. You have to submit written documentation via carrier pigeon and registered mail to such and such address by such and such a time, or those remaining 2 5-year options have become null and void. No, right? What
They'll
does a
let you know
landlord,
30 days after it expired.
or worse, 30 days prior to before the actual whole lease is expiring?
Yeah, yeah.
And then, oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot. I'm so busy just trying to run the practice and catch up on my debt and my debt load and my patients and my hygienist left today, right? That suddenly, oh my God, now the landlord wants a 20% increase in rent. And what are you going to do? Right? Options are already out the door. So
Hmm. Hmm.
as we look to profitability, right, there's obviously, right, there's production and there's cost mitigations, but yes, right, the tenancy expense is typically the second largest hit to overhead. Yet, there's so much focus on how do I save another, 3% on a handpiece or 5% on cotton rolls and gloves, etc. When in most cases the average dentist is paying $600,000 to $700,000 a year just to their landlord and tenancy expense. So on that note, as we dig in, right, truly a privilege for those of you that haven't joined us before. Cirrus, 30 years now in the business. It's our 30th year anniversary, 13,000 of these. I couldn't be more proud of the team. You know, Scott's been negotiating dental office leases with Cirrus now over 21 years. Cameron, one of the lawyers, you know, cresting 10. John, 12 years. We have an incredible experience and data points of thousands and tens of thousands of dental leases on staff, you know, doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these dental deals every year. And privileged to be the owner and president of Cirrus. And I've always enjoyed helping doctors and meeting a large dental group across the country today. It was great conversations about, look, how are we managing the lease portfolio? How are we tracking lease expiry dates? How are we attacking what is over $1 million a year in paying landlords? How do we get that same benefit of being a multi-site client and getting the same economies of scale negotiation with the landlords as, you know, as they are with other vendors? And of course, Steve, 25 years sales, marketing, management experience, small businesses, large enterprise corporations, and again, a perfect example of how Henry Schein helps doctors with the business and driving those profitability. Right? It's still to this day, they're not teaching about profit and risk mitigation or otherwise. We've got a great CE course that Steve's co-hosting with us next week with Paul Martin, one of the top employment litigators in the province of Ontario. And it's exactly that. It's how do we help our clients, your clients, you for joining us this evening on how to look differently at their business, how to look differently at the numbers and drive that profitability. So, Steve, thank you again, and looking forward to hearing what how you can share some great best practices with all the members tonight.
Well, thanks for posting my photo from 20 years ago. That was very nice of you. And
all you have is some glasses now, Steve.
Pop them on every once in a while. No, I think what sets us apart from the rest of the merchandise sellers or sundries providers is that we're full view of the practice. And really, ultimately, what me and my team, the team at Henry Schein, and that goes for the service technicians to the sales representative consultants, is that truly what they're trying to do is make our clients, their practices successful, their teams happier, right? The bottom line for that particular practice more profitable. I love this topic, Eric, because one, it's timely, being January. We're almost a bit late getting into 24, but still, right? What I'm finding, and you'd mentioned in my podcast, we talk to a lot of people that look at personal growth and look at business growth and how to be, you know, improve how you do things. And oftentimes, like a lot of people, it's normal human behavior that, you know, probably 2 out of 10 will probably do a plan for the year. The other 8, or maybe the other 4 or 5, will probably maybe do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I'll set the plan and then tuck it up in the top shelf and then not look at it. The 4-letter word that you had mentioned, busy. Everybody's busy. And so you roll into the new year. You start back up again. You had a nice little break over Christmas, right? Your staff is back after 2 weeks off. They're happy, nice and refreshed. And you just get back on the bike again and you start going through the year. And I think this is a perfect opportunity where we set ourselves apart from the rest of the bunch is to dig into the practice analysis. And this gets into the production from last year and looks at where can you make improvements, what can you work on. And again, we talk to on our podcast, talk to a planner that looks at putting goals together. It's like, let's start at the small things. You don't need to look at the whole pie, as talking pies, but where are the improvements? You can't start without the history. This particular slide is really the breakdown of this particular practice for the previous year. gives you a snapshot of where the procedures happens in the different categories, what the comparisons are, with similar practice sizes in Ontario, gives you a gauge. But really, it's just okay, well, I didn't know that. I understood that my preventative was pretty, substantial within the practice. I didn't know it was that number, or I thought I was doing a little bit more ortho than I thought I did. But really, that's an opportunity that I could look at for the new year. So great. Then at least you can pinpoint one or two things and work on it from there. Too many struggles, and you mentioned it earlier, Eric, is that the focus is on saving 10% on the cotton rolls, saving a few bucks. At the end of the day, that's you can scramble together, $5,000 or $6,000 savings for the year. This, examination of where the business is and where you want to take it, and if you want to go to the next slide, really takes a look at where the opportunity is. And it's real. Would you like to work on the $6,000, or would you like to work on the $600,000 to really turn up the profitability? And oftentimes our clients are saying, the doctors are saying, I need to increase production. I need to look at new opportunities for new revenue, and I need to get the team engaged. All of those three things can be done within understanding what's happening between the four walls of the practice and the one or two goals that you want to put forward to really make a change in the new year. And then the nice part about this too, I know you want to say something. The nice part about this is it can be a regular occurrence, right? Every year, take a snapshot. How did we do? What do we want to do better? And I'd say that in essence is what our team is trying to do, and to build trust with our practitioners and really add some value that others are not doing.
So, Steve, this is great. I haven't seen one presented quite like this before. I've been with a few, especially in the U.S., Shine FSCs, and sort of going through some of these. But maybe just to take a step back, if where does this come from? How does this data come to be? And how does Shine leverage this? Because we used to use something called the performance mark, which was great because it compared. It was in a former life prior to Cirrus, but it was great because it did show key performance indicators in comparison to averages, and then it created a neat little conversation. Say, well, yeah, I don't do much of phase one, phase two, and yeah, we're just starting to get into Invisalign. But where does all this come from?
It's simply pulled from the practice management software. So whatever software, and we can pull it from any which one. Just pull the procedures for the previous year, for that time period. Look at how many active patients you have within that practice management software, and then we plug in the numbers, and it pulls together a nice little report that can sometimes be complicating. But where the essence of this is to again back, what are the one or two goals that you want to look at this year to really improve production, team involvement, and new revenue opportunities. Typically, that's where it goes. And that's where we'll understand where those opportunities might be. And then it's our role at Henry Schein and the consultants is to work together to put those plans in place to move the needle and really to make those improvements. And again, it's painless. There's not much that it's not, and we're not extracting customer or patient information. It's just simple numbers around procedures. That's it. There's no other, I've blacked out the practice, the practice name there, but
yep.
It looks like a pretty healthy practice, 4,000 active patients, good revenue production. But you can see that even in that practice, there is plenty of opportunity to make some improvements. Even if you cut into that, a quarter, yep. You're improving the practice production by a couple $100,000, which kind of ties into what you talk about in terms of finding and uncovering those six-figure opportunities that are right there when you look between the numbers and look between the lines, right?
That's right. And a perfect lead in. So as we dig into data, a little introductory poll. I know there was a few that joined a few minutes late, but uh, just will help to customize some of the content this evening as we go through. And I see some good questions that have just jumped in as well. But let us know a little bit of background, right? In terms of your situation. Are you in the stage of opening, relocating? Are you acquiring? Are you planning to transition in the next 5 years? Stay put and dig in, right? And then that'll help to get a framework of, again, leverage as it pertains to those lease negotiations, owing, leasing, etc. So we've got a quick little poll that's there as well. One quick question from Douglas here. So, in an urban center, 300,000 plus population, storefront in a suburban visible strip mall unit, major arterial road. What would be a fair price per square foot for the shell, exterior walls, empty new build, HVAC inclusive, assuming CAM expenses are extra, or property and taxes usually extra? So that's actually a perfect lead in as we look through. So one of the next pieces here is the real estate data. So Douglas, one of the things that we do, and part of the poll, actually, the last question, if you're curious about demographics, your rental rate, etc., there's a little yes button there, and we can certainly pull those for you and set up a time to review them. But this is, one of the key things that makes Cirrus unique to that point is we have access. We're the only healthcare specialized tenant advisory and lease negotiation firm of our kind in North America. And it's pretty staggering. This is a massively expensive solution that I buy and pay for because it gives us access to 1.5 million verified listings. So these are the drones and the planes and people knocking on doors. This is the service that we license. And it does give us this great component. So, Steve, as you were saying before, how do I figure out where to start and how? Got to be leveraging the right technology and the right partner with the access to the right technology, because if not, it becomes like any minute you spend trying to go through MLS or LoopNet or otherwise to try to find that space is and can be a fool's errand.
I
So
imagine too that they're the only interest of the real estate agent and or the landlord is the real estate agent or the landlord. Their priorities are the ones that they're going to look out for. You in your work that you do, it's really for the benefit of the doctor or the business owner.
I mean, look, it's a valid point just to simply follow the money. And look, there's we work with top brokers throughout the country, and many of them are incredible tenant representatives or representatives for the landlord or double ending or both.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the difference that we really sort of focus on is as we look at these scenarios, let's say it's for Steve and Steve's next practice, right? We want to look out, we're always paid directly by the doctor. So, right, we can be as candid and, it doesn't matter if it takes a week, a month, a year, right?
Right.
We're here to make sure that it's the right long-term fit. So, as we go through, we can see that right now there's over 475 spaces, ground floor retail in strip plazas just throughout the GTHA. But then it's the data. So as we look through some of these, we've got this sort of, again, neat components that we can see just about everything on the planet here, when it's sold for, even what some of the mortgage amounts are as it pertains to renewals, when it was built. Right, what's currently available? Here's 1,490 square feet, ground floor retail, $18.52. Here's what other data is for the building, what other tenants are paying, market rents, really interesting stuff, down 22% year over year, right? In terms of the shift of what's going on, Steve, back to your original question. Here's another interesting one that, if the doctor was to leave, it would take the landlord over 8.6 months to fill that space, right? So when we talk about leverage, when we talk about, how would
Mm-hmm.
we sort of set this up, it's key. And then even into the demographic data, Well, heck, doctor, just via osmosis, there's 7.2% increase in household growth within 1 kilometer coming through, 10%. How are you preparing for that growth? How are you preparing for that future profitability, or to make sure that you're not losing patients as that growth occurs? So, as we get into that data, again, if you're curious about it for your own building, happy to, in appreciation of people's time, happy to provide this for you and sort of walk you through how the numbers are calculated and where it comes from. But especially in the major urban centers, this is why, again, Douglas, to your question, tough to know because everything's different. But happy to pull it up if you've got a specific address. But let's say, Steve, I want to do a lot more pedo work, right? I see a ton of opportunity. I've got a specialist actually. My niece is going into pedodontistry, and I'd love to get into that. Or you know what? I've got a ton of the younger millennials that are coming through, and they're really big into Invisalign, etc. If they didn't get the braces done earlier, so that's here. Or you know what, I want to do a lot more sort of geriatric type work for the older demographic, right? We can pull that household income, household by maintainer, household by university degree, marital status, household income, even employment status is through here. And then if you're trying to, again, drive your profitability, it starts with data, right? The big theme, as you can see here, is to know, what are you going after? What does that business plan look like? You don't have to have graduated from a business school to start to really frame how and what that market size is, as long as you've got the data. So here, right, the average household is spending over $2,700, almost $3,000 a month on health and personal care. It's probably the fifth highest expense for the household. So again, this data can be helpful to say, look, it's a $52 million industry, Steve, within 2 kilometers. It's $235 million within 5 kilometers, and within 10 kilometers, it's $1 billion business, right? Industry for health and personal care. Now, of course, it's not all going to dentistry, but it does help frame, right? How big is that? How big is that bucket that you're
Mhm.
going after?
I love the richness of the data. Too often, I imagine, I don't know how many conversations are always like, oh, what's the price per square foot? Oh, that's too expensive, or oh, that sounds good. Let's go see it. I love the richness of this is that it gets further into it to say, okay, well, yeah, one, you can move into that place, but then what's the longevity? What's the future growth? This is where this data really comes out, and you can really do a good comparison between this and the two others that you're looking at, and skip the square footage, but dig into where this is going to be, profitable long run.
Right. And that's a final good piece. And Steve, just as we dig in a little bit deeper, 67% lease, 33% own. A little over 40% is actually contemplating selling within the next 5 years. So that's good. So we've got some later career individuals. And looking through there, over 40% actually have a lease coming up within the next 2 years. So you're right within that sweet spot to maximize that leverage. And another 22% are looking to start or build a practice, just to give you a little bit of a little layout here. Perfect.
Quick
So
question for you, Eric.
yeah,
That always is a question, driving around town, and I'm sure this is happening in a lot of cities. A lot of construction, a lot of new builds, a lot of renovations happening within different sections of the city. Like, I'd be concerned or worried if I had 5 or 10 years left on my lease agreement. Like, there's so much disruption, expansion of roads, different things happening in different neighborhoods. Like, doesn't that worry you? Like, what, that would be a good
yeah, it's
example of, I should really make sure I'm covered here.
the practice brokers and ourselves are really trying to scream from the rooftops to say, term and options are incredibly important. So the lending climate has changed, as you know, but for the doctors joining, what's unique now is the banks will now give up to, if you're going to sell your practice for 1.5 million, the banks will give 100% of that to the doctor, right? God bless, you're the only industry on the planet that there's a special door with a golden key and the doctors walk in on the red carpet. Steve and I have to fight, right, in the back of the bus with the pigs and the chickens to try to get a loan at the bank. Luckily, right, the dentist, you've got 100% loan each and every time, which is fantastic. With that being said, yes, the catch with that is there has to be the continuity and predictability of cash flow. What does that mean? Well, the bank and their underwriters now, rule of thumb is if the buyer of your clinic is now going to want a 12-year term, because to pay at $1.5 million, they're certainly going to want to stretch that out as long as they can. To get the 12-year term, the kick is the underwriters at the bank, to approve them, will want at least the same term of term and or options, and they must be transferable options to the buyer, because no, they're not going to give the buyer a 12-year payback if there's only 8 years left on the lease, or if there's a demolition clause that could potentially kick out the buyer with as little as 6 months worth of notice, or even a relocation clause that might be less, it might be only 2 months worth of notice, and then the landlord can move you to any other location. And oh, Steve, good news, they'll cover 100% of the build out costs up to a maximum of 2 months worth of rent. So yes, it is a major barrier to sell, which is why we're trying to do as many of these outreaches as possible to really help educate the doctor, first of all, how much leverage you have, and then also how to leverage that leverage and prepare for that long-term transition. So for the 42% of you that are looking to sell, what a great way of increasing your EBITDA, right? By helping to restructure and reframe what that major long-term cost is, and your second largest hit to overhead. So again, this is some software and some pro formas and data that we utilize here. But just looking at a regular 1,400 square foot, right, lease starting in February, 10-year term, $25 a square foot, 3 square feet, right? Triple net costs usually for a space like this are probably going to be close to 50% of base rent, which most don't list, and some doctors are signing leases without even knowing what that sort of triple net expense is. So back to Douglas, back to your question. Oh, thank you. So London, perfect. I used to live in London. I'll see if I can pull that up if there's time in the end. But looking through here, if we add some of these core components, we can now start to look at it from both your cash flow as well as the landlord's. So, really, here's just a regular ground floor retail type of space. And that initial 10-year term, not for the full 26 years that the practice is going to be there, but that's a check for $632,000 exiting your bank account for the landlord. So even if you're looking at a renewal, still a fantastic time to be negotiating. So again, the more time, the better. So let's say hypothetically, just for fun, right? Let's say it's 33. Let's say we reduce escalations by a point or two, right? Not uncommon to try to get some free rent, especially if it's a newer build, etc. Let's do it a month at start, for 2 or 3. We just did one in Mississauga. We got 10 months worth of free rent every January of each year. It was a free month. Doesn't happen every day. Or especially if it's a new start, right? Landlords are key that they try to add in tenant improvement cost, right? But it's not necessarily, it's usually baked into the rent. So just tweaking a few little components, look at that. We went from 630 odd thousand to 572,000 over the 10-year term. And if we want to look at it from the landlord side, one of our strategies is, well, look, Mr. Landlord, here's your financial analysis. Don't worry, we did it for you, right? Here's your net income, Mr. Landlord. Here's present value, future value. Here's your cash flow. Here's your rate of return. And oh, by the way, you're breaking even month 1, right? So we can look at it both from the tenant side as well as from the landlord side. This is how the landlord is profiting from you. It's not a bad thing. They're a for-profit business. They're the owner. It's a win-win, right? For those of you that are landlords, Steve, can we boot the landlords off of this here? I know we've got 4 of them. Let's see if we can get it. Needless to say, right? These are the type of things to have the data, right, to go through as we look at. And look, for those of you that own, dentists that own your own building, that's fantastic. You're not off the hook, because look, having a lease to separate your real estate corporation from your practice corporation in some cases can be just as important, right? If you're getting your loans approved, the bank is going to want to see the lease that separates those two different entities. From that being said, that's important. Don't just download something from the internet. If you're then audited from the CRA and suddenly you're not following your lease, or you're overpaying one to, decrease the tax going to Ottawa, right? Suddenly a major red flag. So it's very important that your rent you're paying is based on current and accurate fair market rents, right? Go with the advice of your accountant, etc., to use that as a good tax planning exercise. But very important that you've got the data that if in the event of an audit, right, here's the 7 or 8 comparables as to why this is a fair and accurate market rent. And that's some of the things we do. Same thing, slips and falls, right? Who's responsible? Is it your practice, right? Or is it your building that's responsible for that? And the big one for those, again, for the 33% of you that own your buildings, right? The next question is heaven forbid, if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, what happens, right? If you haven't been paying yourself rent, well, now suddenly all the financials are going to be out of whack. If you've been underpaying in rent, well, now the practice broker is going to say, well, yeah, we were paying this, but we need to adjust it now, and we want to get $40 a square foot because hey, we were charging ourselves a little less, right? So again, if heaven forbid anything happened to you, or if you want to keep your building as a passive form of income upon retirement, having a nice, clear dental specific lease written today, right? So you've got multiple years of clean financials and a clean lease. So when you go and get your valuation, beautiful, right? Here's the 2 clean sets of financials, right? Here's the lease that's been separating the two. And now I'm just going to assign that to you, the buyer. So even those of you that own your own building still need the lease, incredibly important. So these are just some of the financial variables, talking about profitability, tenant improvement allowance, common area maintenance is negotiable, right? You can have a common area maintenance cap so it doesn't go up more than X% per year. You could amortize the common area maintenance. So if they've got to redo the roof or the parking lot or all the work you're doing at Shine headquarters, right? You don't want to have to pass all of that on. You want to spread that out so you're not hit with a massive CAM fee at the end of the year. So there's all these are just 7 main valves, but just some of how we can lead to some significant savings. And then when we go beyond that example for 687,000, right? Suddenly over 20 years and then over 30 years, right? That's a $3 million check. So some of you might say, Steve, I got to get the hell out of my lease. But the challenge is almost every new doctor I have the privilege of talking to, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but everyone's looking for ground floor, strip mall, retail, end cap, lots of natural light, big signage, and parking, right? And that, unfortunately, is leased 99% of the time, unless you want to buy the whole strip mall.
Sounds familiar.
So, Steve, from a high level, right, you've gotten some incredible background. What's some of the advice you do to help the early stage doctor or the doctor now that's opening their second location? What's a couple of tidbits that you do as you're taking them out to lunch and dinner and having these conversations? Dr. Whitaker, great example. The other day that we did a great webinar with. Steve, what's some of the key best practices you do for those doctors expanding, renovating, relocating to help drive that profitability?
Well, I think it starts with that number 2, right? Choosing the right team is getting the right consultants around you to work on that business plan. So it's a partnership in a way of pulling the right people, developing the plan, and then taking it from there, right? Too often it's a run, and then I'll engage all these other people at the 9th or 11th hour, and then you're then cobbling together solutions that then might fit, might not fit. You might get the right answers. I'd really, what's worked effectively and what I've seen work ineffectively is right there at the front end, early in the process, to really understand. And I think where we partner well, and we partner well with a number of other organizations and or internal people within the Shine family, is that we can cover all of those angles and put forward a pretty good idea and proposals to pick and choose, because we've got the leverage of a worldwide organization, and working with some good manufacturing partners, good financing partners, and then piecing together what that doctor's business owner, what their dream is, how can we put it together, and then moving it from there. If that answers your question.
It does. And it's, we get a lot of those all the time, because for those of you in the early stages, and some of our doctors were sharing with us this week at our kickoff, which was, when we're new doctor, there's costs and money flying out everywhere, right? And it's trying to find out where we can hold on, where it can save a little bit. But there's so many big expenses coming through, right? Price is temporary, cost is a lifetime, as one of our doctors shared. So it's one of those pieces that, look, that's key. And look, if you didn't get it right through the original first lease you've signed, you get a up at bat every 5 years to help renegotiate that. But yeah, to that point, look, it's about assembling the right team, the dental specific team. And as you know, it's getting more and more complicated every single day to open a new dental practice. And it's getting more and more expensive every day to open a new dental clinic. So yeah, it's definitely worthwhile. The most important piece is to help assemble that professional team, make sure that everybody plays well in the sandbox, and can help make sure that those dreams and whatnot become a reality. And in many cases, there's team members you might not have even thought of, but that's key. So, structuring, we just had an incredible year, and the most clients in any December. We had more clients hire us in December than we ever have before. So part of it now is, I think there's a realization that, hey, I weathered through COVID. What's in it for me now? I paid my loans on time, I paid my rent on time, I was the only tenant that did. Hey, what's in it for me? And then in the end, the landlord's now trying to stick you with higher rent. No way. So we're seeing a massive pent up of rage, due to lack of a better word, Steve, because yeah, look, you are the best tenant in the planet. And if you put yourselves in the landlord's shoes and think, oh my God, the landlord knows they've got me over a barrel. Well, no, right? And don't be surprised. We just moved a Shine client who was in the same location for years. She hired us to help her go through the process and evaluate renewing her lease. For fun, we reached out to the landlord down the street, and lo and behold, that landlord was newer building, very anxious to secure medical dental tenants. And in the end, we were able to secure $293,000 of tenant improvement allowance and get a reduction in base rent. So, wow, made a lot of sense. So these are just a few of the things that, as we're thinking about profitability, right? And if you're thinking that, hey, I'm mid-career, I don't think I'm going to be able to sell my clinic in the current building, maybe it is time to peel the Band-Aid off and to at least go through the examples to say, look, what's the best possible deal my landlord's willing to give me to stay, versus what's that new landlord down the street that's had that for lease sign up for so long, right? What's that landlord going to do to try to entice me to come in because I am, right, such a great tenant? Anything to add to that, Steve? Planning,
No,
prioritizing,
I was just gonna say,
understanding.
you should have a show. What's the show? Buy it or sell it? What
Deal or no deal?
deal? Well, but it's a great example of where listening, one, and understanding what the doctor and the business owners, what their strategy is and what their goals are, and then having some options available. And that's a great opportunity right there, just to understand, should I stay or should I go, scenario, right? Yeah.
And it's a great one, even though you might not be ready to do it today, or wanting to even think about the headache of potentially relocating, right? It's nice to have just the data, right? And it takes
Yes.
time. It takes time
Yep.
to reach out to
Yep.
these landlords. It takes time to do the analysis and leverage the data you've just seen. But it's a wonderful way to
I
look
just
at
I
long-term profitability.
love it or list it, Eric. That's what I
Thank
was
you.
thinking about.
Thank
Love it or
you.
list it. You need your own love it or list it show.
I did see, and I met him once, right? It's good old Mike Holmes. Holmes on Holmes did one of those
Oh yeah.
today, actually. Funny enough, my wife loves those shows. So how do you structure it, right? We've touched a lot of the financial side. The biggest shot in the arm, as Steve, as you mentioned before, some of these $100,000 risks. And as we wrap up here, these are just some. If you're taking screenshots, this is a fantastic one to look through, because if you're not aware of where and what the red flags are in your particular lease, I implore you to, have us review it and go through a Teams call such as this, right? Or, again, we'll do that for some of the building and the few requests and the addresses that I see now into some of the Q&A sessions. Happy to do some one-to-one times, because there's a lot more to it, right? And in order to properly advise and in order to properly figure out what the status is, right, you've got to do the assessment. But these are just some, right? Most doctors didn't realize that they brought in a contractor through COVID. They didn't notify their landlord, and some of them are in a default situations without knowing still, right? I've seen one where the landlord has said, no, you're in default. You can no longer exercise your options to renew because they had unapproved alterations from the landlord. And yes, in probably 90% of leases, it states you can't even make minor cosmetic changes without the landlord's prior written consent. The assignment section, if you are the part of that 42% that are thinking of selling, this is the section to be reading over about 12 different times. Are you continually liable even after the practice is sold? Can the landlord terminate your lease just for asking to transfer the lease onto a future buyer? Yes. Some landlords are terminating leases and engaging directly with the buyer because they have those three options as part of your assignment and subletting provisions. Demolitions, relocations. We have an incredibly high success rate of having some form of improvement, rewritings, right, or removals. But yes, they are a major piece, and they're probably in major urban centers. They're in over 50% of leases we're seeing today. And then death and disability. If there's one big takeaway from today, especially with profitability, don't just think about today and building your bank account. What about the long-term estate and for your family? There was a devastating example of a doctor north of the GTA who had built out a beautiful 6 operatory practice. 3 weeks prior to the grand opening, had died of a massive heart attack. Fully built out clinic, no doctor, no patients. Steve, how much is that practice worth?
Doesn't sound like a lot.
Zero. In this case, less than zero, right? The
Ouch.
bank then went back to the life insurance to cover the loan. Unfortunately, the landlord went to the spouse and said, unfortunately, Mrs. Smith, you're now responsible for the roughly $9,000 a month, increasing at 4% per year for the remaining 9.5 years on the lease. So the reason why we get pretty passionate about this and sort of screaming from the rooftops here is because, had that doctor had some help through that initial lease negotiation, proposal, letter of intent, right, or even lease renewal, that one little clause that we helped create 30 years ago could have just been a termination right. The spouse could have given 3 months worth of notice and been done. Right? Or if you were at the end of your term, it would give you the ability for your estate to renew the lease on your behalf, right? If you're the personal guarantor and you die, you're in default, you're no longer there, right? And now your estate becomes the guarantor, right? So these are all the types of things that they never teach in dental school, and you never want to think about, no different than wills and estate planning. But boy, oh boy, just to have this, call it insurance policy that doesn't cost you a penny, right? The more things you can do to protect yourself, right? It's just another one of those proactive investments versus reactive costs. And talk about profitability. That can eliminate years of profitability if you're forced to relocate, or if they move in Dental Inc. next door, or. Just one of these little clauses is big, right? For those of you thinking of selling, those of you that have leases coming up for renewal, right? It's key that in many cases, those options to renew are personal. In this case, to Dr. Joe Black. So you might think you've got, hey, I've got 2 more years on my lease and I've got 2 5-year options. You don't, right? You do, the buyer doesn't. Right. Also, if there is any default, such as doing some contracting work or unapproved work through COVID, right, that can be just that little loophole the landlord's looking for to put in that big coffee shop that really wants your space, right? Or here that it's never going to be less than what you're paying in the last year of the term. So you become on this never-ending roller coaster. Talk about profit. You've got these never-ending increasing costs that you can never get ahead of. Right. So the 2 most important things to put onto your phone tonight are 1, when does your lease expire? And 2, right, when is your option to renew deadline? You want to have completed your whole renewal negotiation long before that gun is to your head. Am I going to renew my lease or not? Right, at that 6-month time frame. And this is unfortunately a terrible example where the landlord was presumably a friend. The doctor missed his option to renew deadline just by a couple of days and got this lovely letter that basically stated, you've missed your option to renew deadline. I'm sending my broker today. And they did. They literally put up a for lease sign on the front door of the practice. Oh, and by the way, the doctor was only 4.5 years into his space. He just built out. And then at the bottom, oh, if you want to stay, have your people call my people. So same thing for those of you, I added this in, right? For those of you thinking of selling, right? For the 42% of you, this is absolutely critical. So one little clause found in 75% of dental leases, number 1, you cannot sell without the landlord's prior written consent, full stop. Number 2, right? This is where the landlord shall have the option to either approve the sale, right? The transfer of the lease, 2, decline it, right? And you're done. Or 3, terminate it on the date that you were set to close. So Steve, how much, right? If you're the buyer, I'm trying to sell my practice to you, right? I go to the landlord says, no, terminates my lease and goes directly to you as the buyer to say, why are you dealing with them about my building, right? Hey, tell you what, pay me another 20% in rent and hey, I'll move you into the suite. And decades of hard work and value have just gone out the window from this tiny little sentence that says in subsection 3 to terminate the lease agreement upon the effective date of such proposed lease assignment. On the date of closing of the sale of your clinic, right, the landlord has the right to terminate your lease, regardless of how many terms and options, et cetera, regardless of how good your lease is. That's the one little section that can torpedo the whole process.
So I'd say I'm the doctor and I got a brother-in-law. He can review the lease. He's a lawyer.
Get it all the time.
How often do they catch that?
It's unfortunately all too often that, again, if they're not doing dental office leases all day, every day, right? It's difficult, right? It's difficult to know the uniqueness. Most dentists don't realize that if they're bringing in T4A independent contractors, the landlord could easily deem them, you're bringing in an outside company to work in that operatory as a specialist once a month, right? They are therefore an unapproved sublet. So part of our process, we have assignment language, associates language, basically stating that you can bring in an independent contractor without being deemed that they're a subtenant and they can't increase your rent or hold you in default, right? The last big one I'll point on down here is right at the bottom, which is the one that most doctors absolutely hate, is that even after you sell and transfer your lease, you will still remain as liable for the financial and the full performance of this lease indefinitely. So as long as that lease continues to renew every 5 years from 2 owners, 3 owners, 5 years from now, right? Your corporation and or your personal indemnity or personal guarantee, you will still remain on the hook as much as you are today as the active practicing doctor. On that note, right, the purpose of this is, how do we drive more profitability? Start now. Start at that 24-month mark. The more time we have, the more leverage we have, the more ability we can play that card. If we're 2 months prior to renewal, it's never too late, but certainly, again, the landlord now knows, hey, you're not moving before the exit. What should be done tomorrow? Number one, drive profitability by getting all the facts. Get the full lease, a digital copy. You can email the admin tomorrow. Hey, I'm digitizing my records, Mr. Landlord. Please send me a full copy of my lease. Get the original lease from 1986, every 5-year amendments, renewals, every assignment, right, that got transferred from doctor to doctor over the years, right? Have that full package. Number two, think about your goals. When am I transitioning? When am I growing? What's this great location on, Wonderland Road that might be attractive here, right? Number three, have your lease professionally reviewed, and we'll make a little button for that in a second. That is key. Get the data, get the research, and then get to number five to figure out what that carefully choreographed game of chess looks like. What haven't we done at this point, Steve? Picked up the phone and called the landlord. So please, doctors, don't get into the practice tomorrow and say, wow, Steve taught me all sorts of great stuff. Eric was great. But you know what, Mr. Landlord, how much do you want to charge me? No, right? Start with getting the facts. Start with getting angry, candidly, because don't fall into the same trap of waiting, delaying for the landlord to choose whatever they want to choose from you in the future. So talking about profit, here's $2,000 worth. So again, an appreciation of everyone's time. We have a great perspective and offer here that for that, if you're interested in demographics, your rental rates, and doing that lease review, there's 2 sections at the bottom. Number one is, right, for the complimentary rent critical dates and risk analysis. So again, we'll spend multiple hours preparing for that lease, do a full lease review for you, run through it, and then go through a negotiation treatment plan. Also, we've had some fantastic feedback from Steve here with the practice analysis. If you would like to be connected with your local Henry Schein representative, if you would like to know what your numbers look like for 2023, and how to have some great conversations about driving more profit and production through your clinic, there's question number 6 on the polls you have in front of you. So, really, this is a great component. Sorry, number 4 and number 5. So hopefully now, as we look forward, we looked at some of the top costs, right, to drive more profit, EBITDA, right, value. We talked about the top line, how to drive production through looking at the total number of the type of work you're doing and the percentage of revenue that's coming from that. We also looked at the demographic information to see how your growth is comparing to the demographic growth in the area and what that market looks like for you, as well as looking at how to frame your next negotiation, and that's the big piece, right? You have more leverage than you probably ever thought before, but it's linked to the almighty clock. And the one truth we've always seen is that the more time you have, the more leverage. And and lastly, all of this work is for naught if you end up going to sell the clinic and the landlord says no, or even tries to require a percentage of those practice sale proceeds. I see some great questions, which we'll touch on shortly. Steve, some final points, sir.
I love the point, right? I did a 5-day negotiation course, and right, you brought up at the beginning that the doctor's in such a great position, would be a great tenant in any building or any location, right? Very valuable to the neighborhood and the community. So easy. But what you're bringing to the table in terms of all of the data, all of the research, all of the even the landlord's information on how they could benefit from having the doctor in their uh, in their facility in that property. I think showing up to that negotiation, you are well decked out with being in control of where that conversation goes. And I think that really, to me, that shows the power of what you can deliver, and again, make your client successful.
It's in life, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate for, which is a key one. Um, and and look, you deserve it. Doctors, my God, look what you've gone through over the past 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think the big takeaway is, look, you're not alone in all of this. Steve and his team are incredible to, you know, do all sorts of great tools, reports, conversations, etc. With it doesn't cost a penny. Some questions that came through here. So, Douglas, thank you for the question there. Yeah, happy to pull that up. Might be best to do on a one-to-one for any specific address, etc., just to be respectful of privacy, and if you wanted to discuss that privately, but I appreciate you sharing that. Looking forward to connecting. You've got my direct line here and email. Let me know your availability for a call, tomorrow, later next week, etc. And then also Dr. C, yes, CE, yes, of course. Those will be processed about 10 business days afterwards for all live attendees. So give us about 10 days for it, and looking forward to having my lease looked at. Thank you. Yeah, Dr. C, appreciate it. One of the things that's, again, very helpful is to please send over that original lease that's signed. If it's not signed by both parties, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So please send over that from the original lease digital copy, as well as any amendments, riders, exhibits, or something called an estoppel review. That's another little trick that some landlords do. Is it's supposed to just be a summary, but we've seen so many times where, whoops, they've added in a demo, or whoops, they've removed an option to renew, and that's the last piece that then you've signed, right? That is basically confirmed what, right, that final governing document is. Any final questions? I know we've gone a couple minutes over, but great.
All I'll state, Eric, is that 100% of the time when I've seen you engage with my team and do those lease reviews, just the simple fact of just that snapshot review, that consultation, 100% of the time, there is always something coming back that's of value to the doctor and business owners, right? It never fails. There is no, I've never seen it fail. So, and I am not sponsored by Sirius Consulting, by the way.
But should be.
True story.
Yeah, look, we appreciate that. It's it's sort of a joke that we'll cancel the lease review if the lease is clean and perfect. And we've 30 years we've never canceled a lease review. So, look, it doesn't mean that all leases are terrible and all landlords have, have a pitchfork type of thing.
No, but
They're
I think it's peace of mind though as well, right? That you're comfortable, that the location that you're in, you're satisfied for the number of years that you have negotiated, and that you're in a good position when and if that comes to fruition, then you can move from there in a very positive manner, right?
correct. And for those of you, and this came up at our kickoff this week, thinking, oh well, my landlord's a great guy and I've got a great relationship with them, or they're a great gal, etc., and we get along fine. There is so much monopoly trading going on these days that the likelihood of you having the same landlord by the time that you sell is virtually unheard of, especially 5, 10, 15 years later. There's property developers coming in with $44 million checks, and that landlord who loves you is gone, right? We had a client in California, and yeah, it was his friend, the golfing buddy next door, the other dentist, who sold the building without even telling him, left him with a month-to-month lease. He was ready to throw his keys into the Pacific. He was so upset because they added a new lease, 10-year term, personal guarantee, continuing liability post sale. He was so pissed, he just wanted to walk away, right? All because of the lease. And luckily, we were able to completely turn it around, remove it all, reset expectations, but it really could have gone completely the other direction. So, Dr. C, yeah, looking forward to connecting with you there. Dr. S. Yeah, we'll definitely go through that, and happy to look through if there's, I'm not too sure what stage you're at with that strip mall, but definitely there's a lot more to that price per square foot. You really want to look at base rent annual increases, right? CAM, fixturing, free rent, tenant improvement allowance, and then what else they're sort of bundling into that for you. So perfect. Great. Really appreciate everyone's time. That's fantastic. 56%, Steve, have requested a practice analysis and or quick follow-up from their local Henryshire representative. So we will leverage that, and we'll get that over to you, Steve, to compare to the database and find the local rep and get you connected with ASAP.
Happy to help.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us on a late evening on the East Coast. And those of you on the West Coast, thank you so much for your time as well. Have a fantastic evening and have an incredibly profitable and successful 2024. You deserve it. Thanks so much, everybody.
Have a good night.
Thank you.